Welcome to the last episode of Golden River Underground, a Delta Green campaign inspired by Music from a Darkened Room and Artifact Zero, both by Dennis Detweiler. Why is it the last episode? Stick around and find out.
Good news, I have space for 361 hours and 21 minutes. So
you got me beat. I only got 273 left.
Well,
I've got 42.
I finally figured out how to get my expandable storage working, and so I just gained like 6 terabytes of like well-rated storage. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to move a bunch of stuff over.
Well, let's get started.
Okay.
Yeah, boy.
Well, so it's been a while since we've dropped an actual Golden River Underground episode, and so I feel like I have some explaining to do before we get into what we're about to get into. It won't be any surprise to our hardcore fans who check the app every day to see if we dropped anything, who are mostly in Romania, as far as I know. So all of us have very different schedules. And doing Golden River Underground was always a challenge, but we hit a period where we were having, I don't know, I guess more trouble than usual, and it was a combination of schedules not lining up, and then me just kind of losing track of what we'd done last time and not really wanting to scramble to run the next one. And before I knew it, like I had just kind of lost enthusiasm for it, which is not to say I've lost enthusiasm to play with the group. That is absolutely not the case. I just kind of, I don't know. I ran out of gas for this specific campaign, which is pretty much the same story as what happened with Curse of Strahd. We hit like a rough scheduling patch, and for me, that's how I get burnout. It's not by doing too much. It's by...
it's losing momentum.
It's losing momentum, exactly. Yeah, and that the kind of, I don't know, combination of frustration and just, you know, perceived like shared lack of motivation by the group, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know, we all kind of take our foot off the gas at the same time, and at some point I just feel like I'm done. So this is not the end. It is the end of Golden River Underground. It is not the end of Late Afternoon Gaming releasing episodes. Shepard, you're going to introduce the concept for the next season in a couple minutes, I think. But what we wanted to do with this session was go around the table, talk about kind of what we were thinking in terms of executing the campaign. And then, Shepard, you prepared like a very detailed concept for, you know, maybe we could act something out to kind of bring the story to a close. I propose that instead we just talk about it. It's an interesting document, and it's an interesting way to bring the story to a close. And then I think it's done and dusted, and we'll move on to something new that's armored against the failure mode that I just described, and you know, a little more durable. With respect to weird schedules and people coming in and out.
Yeah, okay. I lost track. What part did you want to start with here?
The plan moving forward.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, I guess thoughts from either of you on what I just said, and then Shepard, if you want to hit us with what we want to do moving forward.
Go ahead.
Well, fine, I'll go ahead then. I do want to the way you described it just now made it sound like it was largely or perhaps entirely your fault. That all of this kind of came to a head, and I just wanted to say that I think that's 100% true.
Thank you for the solidarity. I appreciate that.
No, I think it was definitely a combination of don't feel like it's like, oh, it's my fault that Golden River Underground is stopping. Like it was definitely a combination of everybody.
Well, I only said that because I wanted you to say actually it was your fault, but I didn't think you would go with like shared responsibility. I thought you would say like, no, it was me.
Yeah, but for the campaign, this was something that I had sort of recommended against before we started. This was I think that we did hit a good patch where we were able to come together for a while. I mean, about a year for Golden River Underground, but it had seemed like at the end of Curse of Strahd we ran into the same problem, and it was likely to happen again. So I wanted us to switch to a format that was more. It was looser. We were doing, unrelated one-shots or very short series instead of trying to do a campaign. And ultimately, that's what we're now moving to, is something that's a little more free-form. It's going to be kind of more like just all downtimes all the time, which I think is just more appropriate given our, mutual availability, which is to say we don't have a lot of it. Between any group of, let's say 3 or more of us on the server, we just don't have a lot of mutual availability, so that if it relies on a certain group of people always being available, it just won't work. Not at the moment, and maybe in the future that'll change, but it's just not the case right now. So it makes more sense to have, a season that goes on for a long time that's mostly downtime type stuff, but instead of being something outside the norm, that is the norm. That's just what we do. So I think that it's just going to be easier to find time to do that, or to find a couple people who can do that, with the addition of table talks and revelations and other things in there as well, because those are also relatively easy to schedule and execute.
I do think you also hit a good middle ground with Demons of Dema type thing, where it's not just a one-shot thing. There's multiple episodes and there's continuity between them, but every session has a different cast, and that's okay. It's set up to allow sort of drop-in gameplay.
Right. And that is one of the things I want to close out, is the Demons of Downtime arc in our next season. But yeah, it can happen whenever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's a good point. That ended up being sort of like the model that I think that we're going to move to, is maybe there's some continuity, maybe it's totally unrelated, but there's you can just drop into any episode with few exceptions, and it's self-contained and complete in and of itself. Whereas you really can't do that with Golden River Underground. Like, if you listen to session 8, you'd be like, I don't know what's going on, unless you just listen to session 1 through 7.
It's entirely possible that big fans of the podcast have been wondering, if we'd had a falling out, or if something disastrous had happened. And I do want to encourage speculation like that, if we think it'll get our numbers up.
Well, they can hardly get any lower.
Right, that's why I wanted to encourage it.
Yeah, what's the podcast statistics looking like these days? You have those up?
We're almost to 3,000 all-time downloads.
That's actually pretty cool. Okay.
I mean, it is until you consider that we've got, let me click on this other tab. We have 100 episodes. And that's including the trailer and the special announcement, and so 100 discrete elements that people can listen to on our feed. So the average view count is somewhere, well, it's 29.74. And the median is probably 20.
There was that article you posted though about what was it? Afternoon podcasts or whatever.
Afternoon related podcasts.
Podcasts were on the list.
I'll mention that briefly, and then let's get into talking about Golden River Underground. I got an email on, I think, the late afternoon gaming email, which does not get a lot of traffic. I get a lot of spam on it, but I don't get a lot of useful stuff. And
it was dick pills.
No, it's some of it's the classic scams, like the Nigerian prince, kind of stuff, which I didn't think was real. I thought that was a meme. It's actually real. I've gotten it.
I don't think I've ever gotten one.
Yeah, so I hadn't until more recently. Stuff like that. But no, this was an email from, it was a website. It's called FeedSpot, which is just I don't know much about it. It seems like it's just this automatic list aggregator website. And
okay,
I got an email from it saying hey, we featured you on our list of the 80 best afternoon podcasts. I was like, I don't know what that means. So some of them are just very popular podcasts that I had never heard of, but they seem to have a lot of listeners, millions of followers. And then once you get to number 5 and beyond, it's just any podcast that has the word afternoon in the title, which ours does. That,
But we did pretty well, right?
Yeah, we were out of the 80 podcasts list, we were number 35. But it's like, I guarantee
That's top half.
Nobody in the world looks at these lists for anything. It's just like a bot ad farm kind of thing is what it looks like. But the
Also,
funny
who's
thing,
going to be like, oh, I can't wait to read about 80 podcasts.
right? Yeah, about like. And they're afternoon podcasts. What does that mean? Is it just podcasts with afternoon in the name? Is it ones you're supposed to listen to in the afternoon? Unclear. But it did have some nice little data points for us, which is it has the average or like the frequency that you publish at, and ours is 8 episodes a quarter. And I was like, okay, like the idea when we started was it was going to be weekly or close to it, and of course, 8 episodes a quarter is. Yeah, it's like every other week on average. But yeah, so and the average length is 82 minutes. But anyway, that was kind of weird.
Kind of expected it to be longer, honestly.
No,
I
because
guess the table talks are typically.
the table talks are almost exclusively like 45 minutes to an hour, and then with Golden River Underground, the sessions are approximately that. Well, they're like an hour 20 minutes on average, probably. So. Our D&D sessions were longer, and especially my downtimes are extremely long. Relatively speaking, they're outliers. Mm-hmm. But that's just kind of the nature of doing ones like that, where it's because it's supposed to be a little more self-contained. It's like what Duncan described whenever he talked about Adventurers League, where you kind of got to get through it all the way because I don't want it to extend into another session. The whole point is that we're supposed to get it all done right now. But anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about Golden River Underground.
Let's hit it. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I wanted to just throw out a couple of things that I kind of had in mind with the campaign, and we can talk about those. And so, I don't know if we've ever talked about this before, but Delta Green campaigns, it's kind of tricky to figure out where you want to start things. And so with one shot, a question that always comes up is, do the player characters know each other? Are the player characters already in Delta Green? Do they know about Delta Green? If the answer's no, they don't know each other, or no, they don't know about Delta Green, for something like a one shot like that, that may not be worth setting up.
Yeah, there's no time for all the setup if it's a one-shot.
Right. So, I mean, we usually do something like, you're like already in Delta Green, like you guys are already a cell, and you've done some stuff. Maybe we go into a little bit of detail about what that was, and then this one-shot is just a new mission that you have. So we wanted to do something different, and it's kind of similar to what Pretending to Be People did. I mean, we did a couple of things that are similar to what they did. So we built the town together. We decided that the two of you would be locals in this community that we've made up together, so we're familiar with it, and that you don't know about Delta Green, and that you'll be introduced to these supernatural elements through the story.
Right.
So, I mean, that part I thought was really cool and interesting.
It is, and it's also, when you think about it, that's a perfectly reasonable way to use the Delta Green system. I just think it's probably not that common.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's probably not that common because it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Right.
And there are plenty of unproductive off-ramps there. Like, the players really need to understand that they, to some degree, need to lead into this dangerous paranormal stuff.
Right.
Otherwise, we're going to just roleplay you, like, doing your day jobs and hanging out on the weekends. So...
which we did.
Yeah,
which
we
we did.
A lot of.
So going along with this, though, another reason why well, most Delta Green campaigns involve, or I should say scenarios, not even campaigns, involve the characters traveling to the operation. And so you all get uprooted and sent somewhere, and it may be unfamiliar to you. And so your bonds and any of the home scene type stuff that is supposed to be like a unique thing about the Delta Green system, where your relationships with other people and your home life and things like that, those suffer as a result of the things that you're exposed to and the decisions you have to make. I thought it would be interesting if instead of that being a separate element where at the end of a mission we do home scenes, and they can be very mechanical and formulaic. You can say, okay, the mission is over and you go home. Shepard, what would you like to do for your home scene? And you say like, oh, well, I want to get like some kind of talk therapy to restore some of my sanity. And I say, okay, go ahead and make a sand check. Yeah, like, it can go like that. But in our case...
I like doing that, by the way, just to interject. I like that idea, but I think that it's fun to roll for it and then role play it. Of like, oh wow, it went really poorly. Okay, let's role play a really terrible talk therapy session.
Sure, or at least describe it. Like what was so bad about it?
Right, and we actually did that once. Just talking about home scenes. We did that in Downtime Double Feature way back when, where which is a great session. We did like some Adventurers League downtime days because that was something we'd earned from the previous Adventures League that we had done, and we did exactly that. We like rolled on a table, or Jack's character fought in an arena.
The pit fighting.
Right, and what we did was like we rolled, and then we talked about it afterwards, and acted it out and had some fun with it. And so you can combine both of them, but it does have the potential, if you don't want to spend a lot of time on it, because it's not like the real meat of what's going on, to just be a bunch of die rolls and admin that isn't particularly interesting, but there's a way to make it more fun.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But for this, I wanted to do something that was much more... home scenes do have a tendency to be very separate from the rest of the game.
Right.
And I wanted them to be much more connected. And so... your bonds are other people in the town. It's family and coworkers and stuff like that. And so, you actually interact with them over the course of the game. And so we didn't have discrete home scenes. Mm-hmm. I thought that would pay off later. We just didn't really get that far. That was something that we had changed. And another thing that I did was, and you guys caught on to this relatively quickly, so did some other friends of ours who I play with who listen to the podcast from time to time. And that's, I tried to play an actual, or like there were NPCs that were members of Delta Green that behaved very much like players do in Delta Green scenarios.
Yeah, all the fast talking and like kind of very aggressive action to resolve situations that, there are probably more sensible ways to go about doing everything like that.
Yes, they lie about everything. They're erratic. Mm-hmm. They're making these desperate plays, clearly under the gun, clearly digging themselves into a deep hole.
Mm-hmm. Making enemies of everyone they meet.
Right, and in some cases getting very lucky, and in other cases getting very unlucky. Mm-hmm. And so the story I was trying to sketch out, and it wasn't, I didn't have anything really clear in mind. I was kind of, laying down track in front of the train as it was moving. But I had this idea that there's a 2-man Delta Green team that is, I'm not going to spoil the plot because it's an actual Delta Green module. Elements of this are, and we call that out in the episode titles. The bit that was, unique to our campaign was the Delta Green team that was playing through that module wasn't you. Mm-hmm. And
right, we're NPCs.
Right, and so there is these 2 guys that are federal agents, but were lying about. What their identities are desperately trying to shut down this Majestic 12 operation, where Majestic 12 has tremendous influence over the government. And so basically Majestic 12 is this shadowy kind of conspiracy of, it's like the deep state. but they're really, really deep. And they are aware of aliens and the supernatural, but they are trying to harness this stuff. Delta Green is this fringe element that has been kind of driven underground that is also aware of this same stuff, but they think it's way more than humanity can handle, and they are trying to destroy and suppress and contain, and think that the guys that are trying to harness it are in way over their heads, and are basically that's way it's absolutely not worth the risk, and so they don't have the funding or the resourcing. Their effort is much more desperate, and so these agents are trying to take this antenna, which is part of a time travel system that was being set up by Majestic 12, and they were kind of trying to dismantle it. There was this complicated time travel plot, and Majestic 12 was operating, from behind the scenes, using the FBI to draw attention to these erratic agents, to have them arrested, brought to justice, and then they would be quietly killed.
Interesting.
Oh, okay.
So you guys get mixed up in this. There's a side plot, which was really the first plot of Arthur Donnelly, who was a Delta Green agent.
Right.
Yeah, that was made fairly obvious.
Right, through the material that was in his apartment in particular.
Yeah.
And so that was supposed to be kind of an introduction that, hey, there's something more going on here, and the supernatural, at least, is real. And there seem to be people that are aware of that and are doing something about it. And so something that's interesting about Delta Green campaigns as opposed to one-shots is in one-shots you cannot afford to hit dead ends, because then you just lose. Mm-hmm. In campaigns, theoretically, depending on the nature of the case that you're working, you can hit a dead end and you can go work on something else, and maybe more evidence comes to light, or something changes on the case that you dead ended on.
Right, or it comes back to bite you that you didn't finish it.
Right, or I mean, just you're able to go back and complete it because new evidence comes to light, or you realize something, or, something like that. And so, it wasn't the Arthur Donnelly one wasn't time sensitive. Mm-hmm. And so, you get as far as you get, and then we can revisit it later. The plot with the other agents and the antenna and stuff like that was more of a time-sensitive A plot. But anyway, that's kind of what I had in mind. And so I particularly thought it would be funny for you guys to see Delta Green player characters as NPCs.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I love talking about, typical PC behavior, because it very frequently it falls afoul of any convention of whatever world that they exist within, and that's most starkly obvious when you're playing one that is supposed to closely mirror our modern real world. And so I love poking fun at player character actions, and which of course I'm just as bad at as everyone else, and so it's awesome to have NPCs that are PCs, or PC equivalents that are acting that way, because it's so obvious when you're seeing it from the outside.
Yeah, and I can't remember where this came from, but at some point, this is some video I saw when I was a kid or something like that, where someone asked the question of what would happen if you're playing Zelda and you walk into people's houses and you break all their pots and stuff. What would Zelda be like if people actually got mad at you and you did that?
There's one guy who does in Wind Waker.
You know what I mean, though, right? And that, I mean, that idea was, kind of the foundational concept behind Curse of Strahd as well. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that D&D modules are really light on is ideas for what NPCs' motivations are and how they react if you play into them or against them. And so, the kind of foundational thing that we had going on in Curse of Strahd was, consequences and retaliation and stuff like that from NPCs.
Right, which was like the best thing about everything we did in Vallaki there.
Yeah, just how everything came crashing down, especially the timing of it, how it all kind of was going well until all of a sudden everything went wrong. It was great.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but I to go back to your summary, I think that is it's a great way to set up a campaign. And yeah, almost everything you described doesn't really work in a one shot, which is what we had typically done with Delta Green, and is a more common way to play that game. So, a lot of great things you can set up that we've just kind of ran out of the ability to continue doing, unfortunately.
Okay, so anyway, that's kind of what I had. I'm interested to hear what both of you thought about the campaign and what your plans were for your characters.
It was
first.
Yeah. So this was, and you know this because literally every Delta Green game that I've played has been run by you, Duncan. But this was the first actually protracted one that I've done. I think the runner-up was a 2-session. That's the next longest thing that I've done in Delta Green. And I liked it. It's a slow burn. There was never a session where it felt like there was too much to keep track of, but there was also never a session where it felt like nothing happened. It felt like a much smoother, cleaner pace than a typical D&D game. And I think it's just because of the relatively small amount of agency that you have in Delta Green, and because in D&D, even if you're a low-level character, there's so much stuff you can do that you really have the ability to impact the world around you in ways that in Delta Green you just don't. And so things just proceed at a more reasonable pace. I liked the way that the sessions flowed. I really wanted to learn more about the Spooner House, and that is, I think, of the two plots, that was the one that interested me more. And I thought it was fun that Tim ended up getting the character flaw quirk thing, that he was obsessed with the house. I thought that was pretty funny. That's definitely the thing that makes me the most sad, is that I'm not going to get good closure on that. But I thought it was a lot of fun. I think that Delta Green, I would be very interested in making sure that ends up being more in the rotation. Maybe I'll even try to run something myself. I know that I've never done it before. I've been very much a dead weight in terms of on the production side of things on the server, but maybe I'll actually try to run a Delta Green game. That could be fun.
Yeah, I think that would be cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would love to play a game that you run. For Simon, so my goal with Simon generally was, given that we were doing a campaign, I got the privilege of being able to not, let me think of a good way to say this, to play him a little more realistically, because again, when you're doing a one shot, you have to lean into a bunch of stuff just to be able to facilitate the session. Your guy already has some amount of belief in the supernatural and some experience with it, and is not super skeptical, and is gonna make some leaps that might not otherwise be reasonable. For doing a campaign where we're not read on to any of this stuff at all, I've got the opportunity to develop him as a character who is a skeptic who eventually becomes more convinced of these weird things as he experiences them, which is a lot of fun. We talked earlier in the campaign about, his feeling about the Spooner House up until the point where someone started stealing the evidence. Was okay, yeah, this guy might have been into some weird stuff, but I mean, he killed himself, and it's, whatever. We don't need to try and dig too deep into it, because there's probably just not much to find. He's a detective that has other cases and other things going on, and so he's not prone to jumping to extreme conclusions about supernatural things unless there's really compelling evidence. If you do that during a Delta Green one-shot, then you're being like a party pooper, and it doesn't work. But that's a really great character element in a campaign where you can use that, right? That's like a moment of failure for him that can have repercussions later. So that's the thing that I thought was really fun about this idea, was that I had the space to do that, and I didn't feel like I was ruining anything by doing it. And in fact, I thought I was making things better, which I contend is still true. The thing that I messed up, I think, I don't think it really mattered that much, but I regret, was that Simon was supposed to be more like unlikable, in the sense that like everyone's supposed to hate him. Like he's supposed to be good at his job, but otherwise, he's an alcoholic who is like functioning. I think I made him too high functioning, and I made him too like polite, and I think there's really not that much to dislike about him. The way that I played him, I don't think he's particularly lovable, but I don't think he's particularly hateable. And so I think I messed that up because I have recently, like over the last couple years, really decided that I really like playing polite PCs who don't try to rock the boat and try to work with people, because I think that's atypical, and I think it's a lot more fun. But I shouldn't have played Simon that way. I should have made him more awful to be around, and a curmudgeon, if you will, where people only tolerate him because he is good at being a detective. But if we didn't constantly make reference to his alcoholism and that people hate him, you wouldn't think that anybody should hate him, because he doesn't act in a way that makes him hateable. So I think that was a mistake in the way I played that character, and it's not a huge deal. Like, I don't lose sleep over it, but I do wish I had played better, or had made the character differently so that kind of play was appropriate. But that's kind of the thing I regret. But the eventual evolution that I wanted to have happen is, he was kind of behind the curve on losing sanity, but I wanted him to really start catching up, as he sort of starts to actually question some of his beliefs, and maybe take some steps towards the direction that Tim was already pretty far along on, in terms of being willing to accept these kind of alternative hypotheses for explaining these weird happenings around town. And part of the problem was not playing into the time travel thing earlier. I should have done more with that. But I thought that he was a great kind of like straight man character that could have done a lot of evolution towards being like a little more of a like grizzled Delta Green type veteran that just isn't read onto the program. So that was the eventual goal. Well, actually, no, sorry. The eventual goal was for him to die, because that's the ultimate fate of every Delta Green character. But that's the journey I wanted him to be walking towards. Until
some just go to prison.
Right, some go to prison, or get sucked into the void, or whatever.
So, speaking of, there are a couple of my like DCC players at work who are interested in Delta Green, and so I've been running, kind of a campaign. It's like a miniature campaign for the two of them, and they played a scenario, and typical Delta Green stuff where everything seems pretty much fine until the last 15 minutes of the session, where one of them gets shot in the chest, like, and they're like in critical condition, and the other one is getting arrested and like probably going to go to jail for the rest of his life, right? And so they were trying to figure out like, what are we going to do? Like, do we basically pick this up in the next session and figure out what happens next, or
no, it's done.
And what I offered him was, I'll tell you what, I'll let you like rewind the clock 15 minutes and try to do it differently.
Interesting.
And in this like redo of the session, which took a full session, the other guy, the player that went to prison the first time, was shot and killed. And the player that was shot and maybe killed the first time, basically, I'm trying to remember what happened there. Basically, like, entered another dimension and was swallowed by darkness, you know?
Okay,
Like,
so nothing fundamentally changed about like
it's not a better outcome. And they just
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
traded places. And like, okay, so how'd you guys feel about that? And they were like, yeah.
About
And
the
it wasn't it wasn't because it was some hopeless scenario.
right. Yeah,
they
sometimes
got-
you just get that feeling of like, hey, this is what's got to happen.
Well,
Or
and in this
like,
case, it
there's
was-
no smarter play.
No, I mean they got unlucky. They got unlucky and then made some bizarre decisions. But
As
In a
one
believe it
does.
or
Green
not.
game? That doesn't sound right.
yeah,
That's funny, by the way, Shepard, what you were saying about the likability aspect of Simon. Because I feel like Tim was the opposite. Tim was supposed to be very likable, and he ended up being like a weird, like just extremely unpleasant guy who made
It's
everybody
funny.
angry.
listening to the scenes now with Tim in his office,
he's like a nightmare employee.
he's horrifying.
He's a walking HR atom bomb. Yeah.
And then
Well,
the
and
whole the dinner scene.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, this has more to do with the way we play things than it has to do with like the way, you know, because we're straight up, we're not deep enough into these characters as people to you know, really be them. Like, no, we're playing the way we want to play it, and the way you play is inherently very comedic and, you know, slapstick in a way, which is very entertaining. And then, like I said, I've kind of converged, or not, one person doesn't converge. I have sort of settled on recently playing polite characters. Right. So the way that our natural tendencies lay right now didn't really make sense for the characters that we said we were trying to play.
Yeah, we should have traded.
You're right. Which again, it's still really funny to listen to. It's not a big deal. It's totally fine. But it just, yeah, upon analysis, it doesn't really add up very well. But yeah, I mean, riotously funny. The stuff like at the dinner, at work, those scenes are fantastic. But yeah, they just don't really make a lot of sense.
I think I'm a big fan of the dinner episode,
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that one.
in part just because I think it's so strange that there's an episode of the podcast that's just basically just you guys having dinner.
Right.
And it is a polarizing podcast amongst our friend group,
Yes.
is
because some think, you know, Caboose thinks it's excellent, and I'm not going to say your name because she hasn't like picked out a pseudonym for the server yet, but his wife does not. She was very confused by it.
Yeah. Why does this episode exist?
Because I guess she listens to the podcast sometimes when she's like driving to work.
Okay.
And she's like, I listen to this podcast and I kept waiting for something to happen, and they're just eating the whole time.
Yeah, right. Well, which is, you know, pretty valid. You know, I don't disagree that, you know, it seems kind of pointless. Although Jack and I did do a table talk afterwards where we were kind of discussing why, on the face of it, and dramatically speaking, in a lot of ways, it is kind of pointless. But there are some good things that come out of it, and one of the big things is sort of humanizing some other people within the world. So, you know, now you know Anita and Damien. They've got characters. They're people that Simon obviously cares about. And so little things like that, the more you do them, the more you have meaningful NPC interactions, the more it can feel important when something goes wrong. You know, and like because now there's people that you know and care about in this fictional world that might be affected by whatever the situation is. Same with the chief, same with Maggie, same with, you know, any of the other, like the evidence clerk who wants to be a motorcycle cop. You know, like there's these side characters that we know something about. And so having those kinds of interactions can help to give a little more flavor to the world. Do you have to have an entire dinner session to do that? Maybe not, but it is a way.
And that was definitely the plan going into that dinner session as well. Like, we were like, oh, we're really doing this for world building.
No, but yeah, what I'm saying is like it's even if that's not like why we did it, because originally it probably wouldn't have been very long. It would have been like a 15-minute scene because it was supposed to just be something that Simon does every weekend. But then, you know, for the yucks, I said, well, Simon should invite Tim there, and then, you know, hilarity ensues. But you know, so but that's the way we roll, and that's the way, Duncan, you run games, and that's what makes them so funny, is that you're just like, all right, yeah, sure. Like, if that's what's funny, if that's what's, you know, on the menus tonight, then we'll do it. Why not? Like, we'll just spend the whole session, you know, spilling spaghetti all over our shirts and making Anita progressively more angry about everything everybody says.
Well, and it's funny because I think a lot of people will attest to this who have played these games before. It's very common when I'm running something like D&D or DCC or something like that for, if you lay down a couple of, like, I don't know, somewhat interesting NPCs and the players have good chemistry with each other, you can put them in a tavern or something like that, and they will spend a whole session there.
Right.
Like, talking about what they want to get to eat and, you know, making fun of other people there at the tavern. Like, I mean,
Right,
it
or getting
really
some silly
takes
competition
very
about
little.
something. Or, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and that's great, though, because whenever you end those sessions, everyone goes, wow, that was awesome. Right, rarely do, like, neither Jack nor I was like, wow, that was a waste of time. We thought that was a tremendous session. We were like, this is the best. This was great.
I mean, it's one of the most, if not the most memorable one.
Yeah, it's definitely, I would say so, for this campaign.
Yeah.
And it's much
A lot
like
of good moments.
episode 4 from Curse of Strahd. It's probably the one I've listened to the most, when we show up in Vallaki and we're just meeting all these kooky NPCs. Right, there's the shopkeeper.
Yeah, Gunther.
Right, and then we go to, I don't remember the exact order, but we went to the
bar.
Blue Water Inn or whatever it's called, and met the Mardikovs. Then we went out into the town square and we met the crazy guard guy
Ezek.
with the Ezek with the mutant arm. And then I think we went to the toy shop and we met what's his name?
Blinsky.
Yeah, Blinsky. Yeah. So we had like this incredible series of these like increasingly outrageous NPCs, and that accomplished something, right? We were getting to know the town. And I think it ended with us meeting the vampire hunter Van Richten or Rictavio, whatever his name is.
It was Rictavio. Didn't we also meet the Father Dory that session, or was that later?
No, that was later. Well, yeah, but anyway. So in that session alone, we were just meeting people and having funny interactions with them, and it's a hoot. Like, go back and listen to it. It's a great episode. Because just every interaction is just so ridiculous. But again, it gives context, because almost all of those people came back later, which is no accident. I think, you know, you saw that those interactions were funny and fruitful, and that there was something to be done with them. So then you incorporated them into whatever was happening next, which is a simple calculus for a good GM is, hey, what are the players engaging with? Let's have that come back.
More
up.
of that, yeah.
Right. Like that. It's simple. It's not always easy to execute, but in concept, that is something that is a good recipe for figuring out, you know, hey, what worked last time? Okay, let's incorporate that into what happens next. But I'd like to get kind of back on track and, you know, talk about where the, you know, campaign ends up.
Yes.
So we kind of concluded a while back that we just, as we started off saying, we don't have the availability. We're losing steam in a lot of ways, and there's just not collectively a huge appetite for having this go too much farther. And so what I proposed was, hey, I've thought of a way to tie up all the loose ends in this campaign in like 2 sessions that will, you know, bring a satisfactory into most everything that's going on and address a lot of stuff and be kind of funny. Now, the problem with doing that is that we're not actors, and so trying to pretend that this is all improv. I don't think it's impossible, but I don't think it would have been super great because it would be motivated improv, and it's something we've never done, really. So, as Duncan said at the beginning, we're just going to kind of talk through what my idea was, and we're just going to say that this is what would have happened, or this is what happens to these characters. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah. So the idea was that the next session would start with Simon getting a call from the chief, because he read an article in the Gazelle that basically reveals everything that Simon had told them, and like goes just a hair short of implicating Simon himself, but makes it very clear that the police were feeding them information about stuff like that, which is just like absolutely not okay. And so like he gets like an angry call from the chief telling him that he's beyond saving at this point, and he better get to the office. Simultaneously, Tim gets a call from the station because if you remember back in like session 4 maybe, or well, I don't remember exactly when it was, but there was the arson at the house, or the house burning down. Tim's character was in it, and he was like hanging out in the house and like cooking Totino's pizza rolls and other things. And he got burned, and he had to go to the hospital the next day because his hand was pretty severely burned. And so the doctor, or someone at the hospital called in a tip at some point, maybe now for some reason, that hey, remember there's that arson that you guys were asking the public for any information about? Well, I have some information about that. There was a guy who came in with really severe burns the next day. So he gets a call from the station, and they want to talk to him. And so Tim calls Maggie to let her know that, hey, I gotta take the morning off or whatever because the police are questioning me about something or other, but I'll be back tomorrow. And Maggie just tells him that he's fired because, like, despite the fact that he wrote that really great radar report or whatever, his increasingly erratic behavior and insubordination are beyond anything that she's willing to tolerate. And she's already gotten the approval to, like, put him on some sort of notice, and then him getting called into the police is more than enough for her to just say that he's fired.
Her loss, really.
Yeah, of course. So what that means is both of these characters end up at the police station, upset. So, yeah, they're both upset because Simon's about to lose his job. Tim
has
already lost his job, and he might be getting arrested for the arson that he didn't commit.
But did lie about.
He did lie about it, I think.
I claimed that I was not, that I did not have anything to do with it when I was in fact there. I was at the scene of the crime.
Yeah, you were at least present for it. Yeah.
And using the oven.
Right, yeah, you were like hanging out. You were making it your own home for bizarre reasons. Oh, after breaking and entering.
Yes, true.
Well, you didn't break anything. The ghosts let you in. But anyway, so they go to the station. When they arrive there, the evidence clerk gets noticed that he has gotten the position as the motorcycle cop, which is what he had been asking Simon to help him with, which Simon did, in fact, help him with slightly. I think he put in a good word or something. That's
the one thing that we actually accomplished during this campaign, is we got this guy his new moto cop job.
Yeah. And so he gets, someone else takes over the evidence desk. They would, Simon and Tim would be, getting questioned or something like that when those two agents would enter the station in very PC fashion. They would have like shaved their heads or be in some kind of like not very good disguise and be in like hazmat suits or something like that. And say that like, oh, there's some sort of like breach here, or there's some chemical, whatever, and they're trying to get everybody out so they can get into the evidence room and get the antenna back, because it was stolen from them, yesterday, or it was recovered from them, whatever. Simon and Tim recognize these two guys and immediately like go into action, and so they chase them into the evidence room, and as these guys, go to grab the antenna, Tim presumably shoots at the antenna with his 80 in firearms.
Mm-hmm.
And and basically, so then we go into, crazy mode. So because it's like a time travel device, shooting it with people touching it, is bad. So the agents disappear along with the antenna, and then Simon and Tim would be in like a timeless, they would just be outside of time. So time would be frozen around them, and they'd lose a million sanity or whatever. They would eventually end up back at the Spooner house because they when they walk
quick
out.
Interjection, by the way, just to make sure it doesn't get missed. The ritual gear also gets collected from the evidence area.
Yeah,
because
correct.
it gets knocked loose in the explosion.
Right, and Tim feels compelled to snag it. I'm not even reading this thing that I'm looking right at.
Yep.
Because he's obsessed with the house, and he's like, oh yeah, that stuff, and he grabs it as on the way out. So they make it back to the Spooner house, and basically what they discover there is it's kind of this trippy scene where the Spooner house is like they can see and interact with like all times that it existed from when it was originally built, every edition, when it burned down, because timey-wimey stuff, lose some more sanity, whatever. I think, what did I write? There's a ghostly version of the house there. Parts old and new flash in and out of existence in the blink of an eye. Like every moment of the house's existence is present and absent in this timeless realm. Very spooky. And, it's insane, uncomprehendable stuff. They go inside and they can see, scenes of like the previous tenants being menaced by Uomo Nero, who was the spooky dark guy who they found out about in the journal of the original tenant of the house. And then they realize that this spooky guy is actually like this dread abomination of like a combination of the two agents who got like fused together through this insane timey-wimey nonsense. But we can't interact with them. We can see them, but we're outside of time, and so, whatever. So Tim would get the idea that, through his increasing insanity, that the way to get out of this is to kill Simon and complete this ritual that he vaguely remembers seeing on the piece of furniture that he found in the garage, using the ritual knife and bowl. So he does that, and for whatever reason that works, and then he's able to somehow beat Uomo Nero, and
that doesn't use the firearm skill. That used my 60 in drive.
Right, there you go. Finally. So Tim manages to win, maybe, or whatever. And if he wins, he gets put back into the present, and he's like bloody and insane in the burnt husk of the Spooner house. And then it ends with the motorcycle cop driving up and arresting him, and then presumably putting him away for life.
Yeah.
Well, so that's all fine, but I was gonna go with it was all just a dream.
Oh, he just wakes up and he's late for
simulation.
his French horn recital.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's late for his Corvidian tech therapy session.
We never did establish what the specific war crimes that were being committed were.
No, we
I
did.
thought you guys made some kind of military hardware that had been used against
specifically women and children or something.
Yes.
Yeah. So the idea with all that is, as Duncan was saying earlier, he took elements from two different modules, and we're kind of throwing them together into this. And if it's a longer campaign, then it's fine for those two things to ultimately remain somewhat separate lines of inquiry. But if we were going to wrap up the campaign, then it makes sense to close them both out and pretend like they're actually the same thing.
So this is kind of a pro tip for GMs, though, and it's you could just do the Lost thing, and keep piling on more mystery.
Yeah.
With the implicit promise that things will be closed out in some satisfying way, but you don't ever actually have to do that.
Right, or you can like lay down things that, like here's an example. You could be running like a low level D&D thing that it's going to be a long campaign, and they could be out in the forest hunting down some big bear that is like menacing the town. And while they're out there, you just add a random detail. Hey, you see this weird like runic symbol on carved into some trees, and it looks like they've been there not for very long, like they're pretty recent, and it's like a Y with a triangle around it or something. Just make something up, and then have it have nothing to do with anything that's going on, just something, and then they can ask questions about it. Everyone's like, yeah, I've seen that around, I don't know what's going on, whatever, and then bring it up like 10 sessions later, and then they're like, oh, that was the thing we saw back then, and that'll make you seem like you've got some big plan, but all you're doing is just laying things down that you can or don't have to use later, and it makes it seem like there's something really intricate going on.
So alternatively, what you can do is you can do that. You can say, oh, there's oh, and there's also this like interesting thing here, and they'll try to investigate it, and then you go, oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't find anything out about it. They're like, well, I want to Google it. Yeah, you don't really come up with anything. And then you just stump them, and it can make you feel really powerful.
Right, yeah, you're just manipulating them. But yeah, so I think that would, if we had been able to like successfully execute this, I think that would have been a relatively satisfying end. Tim gets to win, in as much as one ever wins playing Delta Green. Simon dies, which, as I say, is the ultimate fate of all my best Delta Green characters. And it ends on a funny joke, which is the motorcycle cop, which I really liked. But so that was my vision for a way to end it, in a way that ties up pretty much everything, and would be, if done correctly, entertaining. But that was the idea.
I am curious. Just we spent a decent amount of time talking about the time travel, Majestic 12 aspect. On the Spooner House end of things, what was with the old spooky woman I saw in the mirror? Is that something that we can talk about, or?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and break my rule about not talking about this stuff because I'm the one ending the campaign. So
we're done, and you never get to know.
What's going on in the Spooner House is, I mean, you kind of know the origins, right? Is the woman who lived there, Isabel, what's her name?
Wheeler.
She had basically invited this she had like consecrated the ground to this dark spirit, right? And so the whatever it was, the woman that had moved in with her,
the Italian nurse lady,
like she had introduced this to Isabel, and had like introduced it as a way to cure her of the disease that she had, and maybe like prolong her life and stuff like that. And so she, over time, like fed this thing, and ultimately consecrated the house to it. And so what this thing did was, and this is Uomo Nero, it required kind of continual sacrifice in order to keep giving her what she wanted. But it would, it basically like devours people's life force and ultimately traps their soul inside the house with it.
Right, so like you extend your mortal body's existence at the cost of your eternal soul.
Pretty much, something like that. And so, over time, like what it was doing is it was just the people who moved into the house, this thing was feeding on them because it effectively owned the house. Mm-hmm. And it would drive them. They would go insane, and they would be driven to this really dark place where they would do horrible things. Sometimes they would, there were murder-suicides, there were just regular suicides, and all of those people, an aspect of them is forever trapped in that house. Mm-hmm. And so things move around, and you see stuff, and one of the things you saw was like an old woman in a rocking chair, and that was like one of the previous occupants of the house.
Okay.
Right.
And
Is this
so
also from a module, or is this something that you
this
came
was
up
from
with?
a module.
Okay. It's
and-
did you ever see The Haunting of Hill House?
No.
Okay, it's very it's a similar concept. It's a great show.
But in this case, Tim spent enough time there and kind of looked into it enough that he basically got the bug. And so one of the first things the spirit does is it tries to hook you and get
Right, which
you.
is what it did to Arthur, presumably.
Right. So what had happened was Arthur was a Delta Green agent who had initially, a long time ago, been sent to try to figure out what was going on here, and was unsuccessful. And
Got hooked
the
like
hook had been
everybody
set
else.
then. He had become obsessed. And so he kept waiting for the house to go up for sale, and he knew it would, because he knew people who went there were destined to be killed by the house. Or at least that was the pattern that had been established. And he eventually jumped on it. He bought the house, and then, wound up killing himself in the house. That triggered an investigation, right? So these Delta Green agents are sent in to figure out what happened with him. They go to his apartment, they broke in, and they check everything out. And they take some of the incriminating stuff. But while they're there, they also get this other tasking, and that's the antenna story. Because they find out basically through like reports between the police and the university that Dr. Thorley, like there are irregularities with the body that was found on that property that caused red flags to go up at Delta Green. Specifically that it looked like the body that was found there was an impossibly ancient fossil of a currently living person
Wearing a Rolex.
wearing a Rolex, right? And with like surgical pins in the bones. So Thorley realized this. And there's some like complicated time travel stuff going on there. He disappears. Anyway, the deal with the house is, and I think this is well suited to a campaign, is you're likely to decide, okay, the house needs to be burned down, and that is what those Delta Green agents do. Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, well, fuck this place, like it keeps killing people, I'm just gonna burn it down. But what tends to happen is there's somebody that's obsessed with the place that inevitably like rebuilds it just the way it was. Mm-hmm. And the ground itself is consecrated to this dark spirit, and so he's like unaffected by this.
Right.
And so the house gets built back up and it just starts over.
Right. Yeah, and so because I imagine the typical way you play this is, right, you're the Delta Green agents who get a brief about, hey, we had a friendly or an agent or whatever who was investigating this thing and it went sideways and he just iced himself. So, like, we need you to go there and figure out what happened.
Exactly.
For the Spooner house, and then for the antenna one, yeah, sort of similar. Hey, we got a Thorley as is a friendly who reported something or whatever, and you got to go check it out.
Right. And so in this case, I made you NPCs to the like typical telling of that story.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which I think is a great way to run one of those. Again, it makes more sense if you're running it as a campaign instead of a one-shot. If it's a one-shot, you have to be read on. If it's a campaign, it's sort of a little more interesting to not be and to be interacting with this from the outside, whether there are actual Delta Green people involved or not. Right, just coming in cold and not aware of any of the weirdness. And I will say one of the I think my lingering regrets about this is also in some ways probably going to be the end of Golden River, and I like Golden River. I like the place that we made for this, and I obviously have a little more skin in that game because a lot of it was something that I had come up with as a concept and presented, and then we deviated from that original concept when we did our world building session. But But I like Golden River. I thought it was cool. So I imagine that if I run any Delta Green stuff in the future, there's a good chance that it will be happening in Golden River. Just because it's now an established fake place that I can, make whatever I want happen in it.
Yes. But anyway, good stuff to come. I enjoyed the campaign, even though we're ending it prematurely. I think we did cool stuff there. We will definitely play more Delta Green. We will definitely play more D&D and DCC and Mothership and stuff like that. But moving forward, we're going to adopt, as we discussed, like a scheduling system that does not necessitate the same people being available every time.
Right.
And that way we can play more regularly, because we'll be able to do it with different groups, and hopefully the episodes will be more approachable as well. I mean, we've all talked about this, but I know that when I go back and re-listen to episodes, I tend to gravitate towards the downtime stuff because it's bite-sized. I don't require a bunch of context, and so I'm interested in doing that stuff moving forward, and it's good to be back.
Yeah. Well, and it's something I've addressed before. For our top episodes all time, almost there's only a couple of them that are mainline campaign sessions. The sessions 1, 2, and 4 from Curse of Strahd are all in the top 10. Which makes sense because they were some of the first things we ever published, so naturally they're going to be high. And they're at the beginning. And then session 9 of Golden River Underground, which is the dinner party. That I don't know why that one has so many listens.
I'm glad it does, though.
But all of the other ones, it's Shackles of Blood, it's Where My Demons Hide, Beneath the Hills, double feature, and then Witch Hunt Part 1 and 2.
Another thing that needs to finish.
Yeah, I know I've said it before. I'm working on something that you will one day get to experience.
I want that hat.
I have not had the time to finish it, but I think you'll enjoy it.
Okay, and with that, let's wrap it.
Sweet.
All right.